Penguin Random House Audio presents Robert Ludlum's The Bourne Escape by Brian Freeman. Read for you by Scott Brick. The Past. The bullet from the target rifle burned like a razor blade across David Webb's neck and landed in the heavy rubber trap to which he was bound. Where he felt the sting, a single trickle of blood dripped down his skin. Each of the earlier bullets had come close without actually striking him. The first had landed 2 inches to the left of his shoulder. The second, an inch away from his right ear. The third, half an inch below his groin, in the valley between his muscled legs. The fourth, immediately above his head, had parted his swept-back muddy brown hair and singed his scalp with its heat. Now, he'd been hit. Was that deliberate? A way to maximize his fear? Or had the shooter made an error? It didn't matter. David felt his muscles begin to tighten, but he restrained his body's instinct to flinch at the impact. His mind stayed calm, his limbs motionless. Sweat bathed his skin, but he ignored the dampness. He measured out each breath and focused on slowing down his heartbeat, which stampeded in his chest. Inside his mind, danger didn't exist. This was nothing but a circus, where a knife thrower showed off his skills to impress the audience. In this case, the audience was one man in a Savile Row suit, standing on a third-floor balcony above the manicured garden of his Marne-la-Coquette estate. The target where David was bound had been positioned at the rear of the garden, near a stone wall that separated the mansion from the green lawns of the Parc Sportif. He was posed like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, arms outstretched, legs spread eagle, his wrists and ankles secured with Velcro straps. The old woman who'd tied him, Je m'appelle Madame Abbott, had taken his Glock and shoulder holster. Then she'd waited with outstretched arms for him to undress. Her eyes, still hungry despite her age, followed his movements with erotic interest, until he'd given her all his clothes and was completely naked in front of her. When you were exposed, you were vulnerable. When you were exposed, you cannot hide. Those were the rules of the monk. David kept his head perfectly still as he anticipated the next bullet. The slightest twitch meant the difference between life and death as the marksman took aim. Even so, David's eyes moved constantly, memorizing every detail of the garden. The circular pond in the middle of the narrow rectangular lawn, with a single fountain bubbling out of green water and lily pads on its surface. The conical trimmed bushes, 8 on either side of the grass, casting arrowhead shadows in the morning sun. The statue of Zeus atop a marble pedestal, bearded, a wreath around his curly hair, a gold-painted lightning bolt clenched in his upraised fist. No one but the king of the gods for the owner of this estate. Later, assuming the Olympic medalist 50 yards away didn't make a mistake and kill him, David would need to describe the setting with perfect recall. He didn't know which details he'd be asked about. That was part of the test. This exercise is about maintaining your ability to function in the face of lethal threats. His mentor had told him, "You will be afraid, but you cannot let fear rattle you or make you panic. It's essential that your mind continue to operate. Think, observe, strategize, remember." Is that clear? You can't pause an operation simply because you're under attack. The intent of this lesson isn't to harm you, David, but even the most competent shooter can miss on a given shot. If he does, you may be injured, or you may die. That's the risk you accept by doing this. It's my belief that training should replicate as much as possible the actual conditions an agent will experience in the field. His mentor, David Abbott, the man after whom he'd been named. David Abbott, the son of an auto industry billionaire whose wealth had given Abbott the financial freedom to devote his brilliant, bold, and calculating mind to the clandestine intelligence services. To his allies, he was the monk, a black ops pioneer always 2 steps ahead of everyone else, anticipating new global threats from the smallest of clues. To his enemies, he was a pirate, reckless and ambitious, not caring how many lives he put at risk with his schemes. David Abbott, the man with whom he'd lived for almost a decade after his parents were killed. The 2 of them had shared a brownstone on East 71st Street in New York for most of that time. Then 6 months ago, without warning, Abbott had moved them out of his Manhattan home base. The building was being renovated from top to bottom for a special project, he said. But someday David would see it again. Since then, the 2 of them had traveled around the world to Abbott's various homes: Iceland, Norway, Turkey, Vietnam, Singapore, Hawaii, and now Paris. In each location, Abbott had arranged a new lesson, increasing in difficulty. Until now, I've emphasized your physical and mental fitness, David. Your strength and dexterity, your stamina, your language skills, your knowledge of history and politics. But it's time for your more specialized training to begin. When we return to the brownstone in New York, you need to be ready. Ready for what? Abbott hadn't told him, but now he knew. David stared across the garden at the marksman holding the bench-rest .22 caliber Anschutz rifle. He couldn't see the man's face. It was hidden by a mask, and the man's body was protected by a plexiglass shield that allowed only a small square egress for the barrel of the rifle. David heard the action of the bolt, but he didn't know when the next bullet would come. The time between shots had varied from 11 seconds up to 6 minutes, in order to keep him off balance, in order to increase his anxiety. I've run this same exercise with 14 men and women, Abbott had told him. 1, and only 1, succeeded completely. 2 made it through the range test, but failed to pass the cognitive recall. 2 survived the challenge itself, but passed out as soon as they were released. 1 soiled himself. 7 panicked and ripped off the Velcro straps after differing numbers of bullets, from the 1st to the 9th. 1 turned his head at the wrong moment, and unfortunately was killed. The rifle once again spat flame. David felt his skin burn, this time on the inner flesh of his left thigh. Another hit. He barely had time to process the pain before another bullet landed below his right ear. Then, barely 5 seconds later, another clipped skin from the tip of a middle finger, and then the last one in the sudden barrage burrowed into the rubber target immediately adjacent to his hip. Shocked by the ferocity of the assault, his muscles and bones developed a mind of their own, desperate to fly, to leap out of the line of fire into the grass. His brain struggled to control his body, hold his arms and legs back from lurching free of the Velcro bonds, keep his mouth from screaming. He concentrated all of his thoughts on the empty eyes of Zeus, and he turned himself into stone, like the statue. A long pause followed. The garden became completely still, except for the hum of bees. A gentle breeze blew away the smoke. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Was this the end? Was the test over? But the shooter remained behind the rifle, a new bullet ready. David's stare drifted to the estate, which rose immediately behind the garden. It was 200 years old, built of classic French limestone, its chambered windows high and narrow. Abbott was no longer alone on the 3rd-floor balcony, behind the intricately carved iron railing. A woman stood beside him, far enough away that her exact features were difficult to distinguish. She looked to be a few years older than David, perhaps 30. She held her body with a grace that was reserved but extremely attractive, half fire, half ice. Her wavy blonde hair cascaded below her shoulders. She wore a black dress.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?